Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome again at Club Cloud. Today I'm joined by Sohan. Sohan, for me it's really difficult, your last name.
It's Sohan Maheshwar.
Yeah, thanks. Well, before I break my tongue. Today we were talking about keeping up your knowledge with AWS. I still remember the day I contacted you. Well, should we do a talk together? You said, "Wow, this topic is perfect." Why is it perfect?
So, just as a bit of background, I work as a dev advocate with AWS, and as someone working in AWS who has to keep up with the cloud, I find it difficult, right? And it took me a while to sort of get used to how you actually keep up with so many advancements. So, I think I'm a good person to actually talk about this.
Yeah, and you also said, well, this is a pretty common question from the community, because you are a community speaker. I see your face every now and then on Twitch,
My
YouTube,
sympathies,
LinkedIn. You are basically everywhere.
Yeah. So I do run like Twitch sessions weekly on the AWS Twitch, and one of the most common questions asked is this, right? Like, how do I keep up? There's so much information out there. Like, do I pick a stream? And there's so many questions around that, right? So I was so glad that you asked me to do this talk. Yeah.
So where it typically starts, because people are coming from a different world, so the on-premises world or fresh out of school or whatever. Yeah. Where does it typically start, the gathering the knowledge journey?
I think it depends on the sort of journey that you're taking while learning about the cloud. For a lot of people, it is, I don't like the industry I'm in right now. I want to move to tech, or I want to move to the cloud. So that is one particular journey. A lot of people like, hey, I'm not in tech, right? And I think cloud is a good way to get into it. So that's another different journey. A lot of people are in tech and they're like, I need to level up my knowledge. So maybe I'm at a level 200, I need to get to a level 400. So that's a different journey. So I'd really say, depending on what your journey is and what you're really looking out for, there are different ways you can sort of keep up with the cloud, and which is what we can discuss today.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, when we start new project at customers, we always meet people that say, well, the cloud, that's just another data center. I don't need any training preparation. Let me do the work. Yeah. Does it work in practice?
No, it doesn't, Stain. So there is enough statistics and studies out there to show that it is all about the team. Right? It is all about the knowledge that your team has. So if you want to move to the cloud, or if you want to do something that is cloud specific, your team has to have the skills for it. Without that, you're stuck. Right? And there are enough studies for this. So having that knowledge and learning about it is super important.
Yeah, and what would you typically recommend to start? Because if I start reading, I start Googling AWS 101.
Yeah,
I'm overwhelmed by information. The signal to noise ratio is quite... Well, I think it's better than the other way around, but it's difficult to get the best starting point. What would you recommend as a starting point?
Again, I think I just go back to like first principles and decide what it is you want to do, right? I think it's super important to have that in mind. Just saying something like, I want to learn the cloud is a very, very open-ended question. I also think it matters on what your previous background is. So maybe you don't have an opinion on what you want to do with the cloud, but what is your previous background, right? Do you come from a coding background? Do you come from DevOps? Or have you done, like databases before? Or were you interested in any of that? And those could be good starting points to get into, different aspects of the cloud.
Yeah, because it really depends. For example, if you are coming from programming background, you used to do things as code.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have to do infrastructure as code, and you are faced with VPC, subnets, routing, whatever. Yeah. But you can also come from the other angle as an ops guy, right? And then you have to do coding. You have to learn a programming language. There's a lot coming your way when you start using AWS.
Absolutely,
if you do it correctly.
And that's the thing, right? And then it's a question about not learning the cloud, but you have to learn the programming to get to learning about things in the cloud, like deploying whatever. So I think it's really important to look at where you want to go and where you are, and then pick really, what your journey is.
Yeah, so the most obvious one, I think, is just to start preparing for a certification. How does it work with AWS certifications? Which levels do you have?
Yeah, so good question, Stain. There are, I think, 11 certifications right now. And within those certifications, most of them are specialized, right? So you have one for DevOps, you have a machine learning, data analytics. There are also ones for like a solution architect or a developer. Now, these certifications are for people who have familiarity and who have worked on the cloud before. There are also certifications for people just beginning their journey to the cloud, right? It's like there is one called the Cloud Practitioner program or the Cloud Practitioner certification. Now, this is meant for someone who sort of just moved into the cloud. You know what the cloud is, you know how, like compute and databases and serverless works, but it doesn't go into like a level 400, super technical aspect. So if you come from a non-technical background and you sort of want to get into the cloud, this is a perfect first step, right? But if you've been doing this for like 10 years, well, there are other certifications you can look at.
Yeah, and because there are multiple ways to prepare yourself for a certification, right? You can do this from experience by learning it the hard way, basically.
Yes, yeah.
You can learn it maybe on your own pace. And what do you recommend for, let's say, the tech-savvy guys, girls?
So do you mean like people who are familiar with tech and who have already, built things? So there are two things, right? So if you want to pass a certification, you sort of, like with any exam, you sort of need to know what's in the syllabus, right? You need to know what's in that exam. So there is one aspect of preparation involved there. And there are different ways to prep for that. There are courses online. There are AWS specified things on the AWS website itself, because you need to know. For instance, if I'm doing the machine learning AI certification, I can't say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything about SageMaker. I know my own NLP and I know my own ways to deploy models. You need to know that. It's a certification. The other aspect is not just passing the certification, but also learning what's in the certification, right? I think this is super important and people don't talk about it enough. Getting or having that certification can get you to the interview. But if you actually don't know what you've studied and you've just memorized all the facts, you're not going to get through that interview, right? Yeah. And I know this might be a slightly controversial thing to say, but it is very important to actually learn and build with what is in that syllabus.
Yeah, that's why they probably say that you need a couple of years experience before taking the exam. Because we can go to a cloud Google, for example, do some binge watching during the weekend and do an exam on Monday. But it doesn't make you a qualified engineer or architect.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, because if you have a good memory, you can remember like everything you binge watched and write the exam 2 days later and maybe pass it with the help of some luck, but that doesn't prove that you know something. Yeah. And I think that is also very important.
Yeah, and this is getting certified, but staying certified is a different topic, right? If you do a lot of certifications during a short period, then the recertification train will hit you at some point. Do you have some recommendations on staying up to date with your knowledge?
So there are different ways to do it. If you have a certification in a specific, like say ML or analytics, it is good to maybe keep up with either the specific blogs on AWS, or if you follow certain people who either tweet or talk about it on social, it's good to keep up with them as well. Having said that, there can be a feeling of feeling overwhelmed with all of this stuff that's coming in, right? If you follow the What's New blog on AWS, which I try to do sometimes, there is a lot, right? So it can be overwhelming. So I really say, try and pick that niche that you've already done and stick to it.
Yeah. We have a question.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's 4 sentences, so I have to read a bit.
Yeah.
It's from Shambhu. He has a security background, and I want to start his career in data. He has a mixed background of Windows, passive networking, Cisco, networking, firewalls, etc. What would you recommend him to do so?
Oh, that's
he wants to switch from security to data.
To data. Well, when it comes to data and certifications in AWS, I think there are 2 that you can take. There is the data analytics one, which is more about data lakes, data warehouses, analytics, Redshift, all of those sort of certifications. And there's one that involves data, but more on a data science type certification, which is the ML and the machine learning certification. Shambhu, I'd say depending on what you're interested in, both analytics and machine learning are, as you would know, Stein, all companies want them. They are the talk of town. So in terms of scope, there is scope for both of them. I'd say depending on what you're more interested in, if you're more interested in the analytics data side, then maybe the analytics certification. If you're interested in the data science side, the machine learning certification.
And especially the combination security and data is...
That is a good point. Yeah.
So you just mentioned reading the AWS What's New blog.
Yeah.
And you said, I try to do that. Why trying?
Okay, this given that I work for AWS, this might sound controversial, but no, look, there is a lot to keep up, like you said, Stein. And the What's New blog has so many new launches, so many new features, services that are launched, that beyond a point I felt very overwhelmed, and I found it very hard to keep up with. Right? And I think it's okay for you not to follow everything. And I'm saying this as someone who works in AWS, who's supposed to know this. And I have certain niches that I like to be deep into, like some of the emerging tech, some of the AI services, serverless. So those things I actually follow. So any small launch in Lambda, I know exactly what's happening. I can talk about it. But something in, say, I don't know, IoT, for instance, I'm not an expert in. And
Greengrass,
what's that? Yeah. So I don't necessarily follow everything with it. The big launches for sure, but yeah, it's a way of keeping it very streamlined for myself. And how is it for you, Stein? Because you're a CTO, you need to follow a lot of things, right?
Yeah. I think we have the same struggle. For me, it's also hard. I try to keep up with all the topics, and therefore I mainly read the headlines. And sometimes there's some topic where, oh, this is interesting, and then I go into the details, and then you start having the feeling that you have to try something, right? And that's my biggest issue. If I read everything in detail, I also want to try things, and then we also have some work to do during the day. It's so hard. And this is just the AWS What's New blog. We also have a security blog. We have ML blogs, social media, Reddit. so many inputs, and it's really difficult to keep up to date with everything in detail. So I choose the one. Basically, maybe it's the same as your approach. I choose the topics which I want to know more about, and that depends a bit on my personal interest, but sometimes it's also about what the customers are doing.
Right.
So we have some topics, let's say, about the less technical things. I'm a technical guy. I would like to read about technical stuff. So cost optimization is important, but that's not. I try to keep up there as well, but it's difficult. I have a hard time keeping up, especially because what's really difficult for me. When I go to a customer, let's say I go to a customer at 8:30 in the morning, when I enter the building, most likely they are going to ask me questions about announcements which are happened during the night while I was sleeping. And they expect me to know everything.
Trust me, I've been at live workshops where I'll be like, hey, so click here, and then the button's not there. I'm like, wait a minute, okay, because the UI has changed and there's like this new feature, right? It can happen. And I think it's okay to accept that you might miss things, that things change. It is a fast-moving industry on the whole, so it's fine. I think having some depth of knowledge as opposed to just like trying to learn everything and not learning anything is not as good as maybe trying to learn 5 things and learning all of them.
Yeah, it's more like a T-shaped approach. And it's completely different than what we are used to, right? For me, I learned so many things in the years while I worked with AWS, probably more than I did in my previous life.
Yes. Yeah, you know what, I was thinking about this recently, and I started my career in like the late 2000s, but I did a lot of programming between 2010 and 2013. And I always felt that the biggest skill set to have then was to look for information. Because Stack Overflow wasn't that popular. There was hardly anything on YouTube. There were a few documentation pages, but there were these bulletin boards that you would find this piece of information you needed. And now, 10 years later, it's the sort of opposite, where all the information's out there and it's just coming at you. And like you said, you have to separate that signal and the noise, right? And really pick your lanes and trust that and go deep there.
Yeah. So, talking about signal and noise, what are the typically sources to follow? Are there any people to follow, for example?
Well, again, lots, I think, especially with how social media is structured. So here's my approach, right? Because on social media, there's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of that stuff. Then you have your data sources like Medium, Dev2, YouTube, and all of that. And then there are communities, right? There's Reddit, there are closed groups on Slack, Discord, and in person, like user groups, groups at work, all of that. I pick one of each, right? So I pick one thing on social media. Like if I say Twitter is my thing, I pick Twitter and I don't bother with the others. I pick one community that I really want to feel part of, right? Either it's Reddit or the user group, whatever. And with the data sources, I use them just for search, right? I'm trying not to like consume everything, because so much of it is like, oh, this is awesome, I want to do this, and then no, right? But if I want to do something, I will look there. So that's the approach I take. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. I'm interested to know what you do.
Yeah, I think it's similar for me. I have some people which I follow, but it's more. I follow the same people on LinkedIn and Twitter, for example, because they share different things. Right?
Yes.
But I make a selection of the people who I follow.
That's an interesting point as well, right? Like people can share different things on different media as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn is more focused on the business side of things, while Twitter is more about the technical stuff or renting sometimes.
Yeah, about things, yes. Of course.
So are they also? Well, maybe that's the right summary, right? Make the input more consumable. And being part of a community is easier. Talking about things, learning things from your peers is easier than reading a book.
Yeah. No, I think the value of community we've really seen over the past year and a half, like during the pandemic. And recently we've had a couple of in-person meetups, and people are so happy to be back just because they can meet someone else who's going through the same problems or building the same things that you are. Right? And you can do that online as well, absolutely. And people are, 99% of the people are super nice in communities, and they're very helpful. And it's up to you to also try and help others. And I've always found a lot of learning in these communities, right? So do try and find those communities to learn and share as well.
And do you have any specific communities here in this area?
Yeah, well, of course, yes. We have a user group in the Netherlands, an AWS user group, which I highly recommend. You've also been part of it, Shane, and you've done many sessions and you've organized things as well. So, yeah, if you're in the Netherlands region, do join. We had Community Day a couple of months ago, and we're looking to do some big events next year as well. Great community, and, really nice people as well.
Yeah, and also I think the AWS Office Hours, for example.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah. We run office hours every Thursday on Twitch at 3 p.m. Central European Time. This is twitch.tv/AWS. It's basically where it's online, so you can ask us any questions you have about AWS, and me and a couple of my colleagues will try and help you out. So these are some of the avenues that you could really use to learn, and like things like Twitch and Discord. People want to help, and people are, want to share their knowledge. So yeah, take advantage of that.
Yeah, and are there any in-person things you should visit?
Well, I'm not going to say anything now because of COVID. It can be a little controversial, but I've always found a lot of value in community meetups, right? You go in on a day, you see familiar faces, you see them every month, and it's small groups, so you're talking to people. There are also a lot of big events, especially in Amsterdam and Utrecht, and a lot of good tech events coming up as well. So, yeah. And AWS runs a bunch of events too. We have summits, we have dev days, we have reInvent coming up in December in the US.
This month,
yeah. Tiny event in the world.
Well, compared to last year, it's
maybe, yeah.
Or the
but it's still like 5 days and a lot of people. So yeah, even AWS run events have a lot of folks from AWS who are in like either booths or they're sharing their knowledge. So yeah, and all of them are free to attend, so you can take advantage of this and really learn.
Yeah, and I think we shouldn't forget those communities which are not specifically for AWS, but they are focusing, let's say, on the data part. But there are a lot of AWS users in those communities, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like there's a super active Java community, for instance. Like you said, there's a data community. There are a lot of machine learning and AI communities as well in the Netherlands. Again, like find what interests you, find what really calls you, and be a part of the community. I think it's very helpful.
Yeah. If I want to share knowledge, what would be your recommendation? Where should I start?
Okay, yeah. So this is something that I've actually advised a lot of people, right? And I think the great thing about the internet is you can choose how you want to share knowledge. For instance, I'm not a big fan of making 15-second videos myself because I'm not good at that, but I like writing like long blog posts.
Yeah.
So I'll write long blog posts. I might take longer time to write that, but there is more value in like a long blog post over a period of say 6 months. Some people are super nice at making like quick 1-minute explainer videos, right? And do that. Like again, you can do podcasts, you can do voice, writing, drawing, video, TikTok, whatever. It doesn't matter now. As long as you're sharing knowledge, that's it. And you're part of the community. And trust me, sharing knowledge is the best way to learn. You learn so much as well.
Yeah, because you get questions from other users. Yeah. You will read other blogs because you get recommendations, etc. Yeah. So And to be honest, it's fun to do, right?
It is fun to do, yes. Which is why I said it's important to pick what you like to do.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the communities. Are there also different ways to interact? Because with writing a blog post, I'm sending something. Maybe I get some questions in return. But what if I want to start a conversation?
I mean, social media can be both good and bad for something like that. I think you know how it is on sites like Twitter, where you can get a lot of negative things as well. I do like the fact that a lot of both companies, including AWS, partners, Xebia, a lot of conferences as well have things like call for papers, right? Where they're hosting a conference or they're hosting a meetup, and there is an open call for papers where you can share your knowledge with like-minded people. And I find this very unexplored, because I know that there are so many people out there with so much knowledge who aren't necessarily sharing that information. It could be because either they are hesitant, they don't know. Look out for these things. You can seek them out as well. You don't necessarily have to find them only on social media, and sign up for it. Again, sharing your knowledge is a great way to learn, to meet people, and at the end of the day, it's good for your personal profile and that part of development as well. Yeah,
and also, for example, if you want to interact with builders from a certain tool, for example, it's really nice to join those Slack or Discords, right? Because then you get the more interaction with the people who are actually building the tool for you.
Yes, for sure. Having that sort of interaction is very, like, for instance, Amplify, AWS Amplify, it's a service. They have their own Discord channel. Very active, great community there, and the team is very active on that community. So they get feedback about, hey, we're not sure how to do this one thing because we couldn't find it in the documentation. And 2 weeks later, there's this guide and a video out on that exact thing. So it really is like that now. And I think the internet has sort of shrunk the world in terms of interacting and meeting with someone like this. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, and then what I also see is that those projects, they have their own GitHub repositories.
Yes.
And with Git, my first thought with Git is version control.
Yeah.
But if you look at the things around the Git project, basically, you'll see a roadmap, you will see issues, PRs.
Yeah.
It's also nice to follow those things, right?
Absolutely. And if you find, like, say, a bug or something's not working, it's always good, like you said, to add that as an issue. Yeah. Because you're, in a way, contributing directly to a project that you're working on, right? You're helping it make it better. And I know that teams appreciate that. And like you said, there's a small community around that as well. It's not just version control. It is the ecosystem around all of that.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to solve the issue yourself with creating a PR, for example, with the proper fix in it. You can also explain, well, I was trying this and it didn't work out as I was expecting, and this was happening, blah, 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 to get the things moving, right?
Yep. So, funny story, my colleague, fellow evangelist Sebastian, he found something like this on, and he wrote like this 3-line piece of code, like the small gist 2 years ago. And he posted a photo recently. Even today, people are like, thank you, you're a legend, this is amazing. Because it's a common mistake people make, right? And he just added it like a small README in his personal GitHub. And people find it online. And people are still thanking him 2 years later for those 3 lines of code. And that things like that happen. So, creating that issue and saying, this is what works, and someone else solving it, that's how I find a lot of, like when I'm stuck, I Google it. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, his name again.
Yeah.
I had the same with contributing something to an open source project. And I went to a reInvent. And during replay, I run into the guy who was maintaining the project.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, well, I know your face.
Yeah. Nice.
Talking about reInvent, there are a lot of topics to follow, right? If I, for example, I'm an expert on networking. My first reaction, I will go to a level 400 session about VPCs, etc. That doesn't necessarily give me the opportunity to learn more, right? I really like to go to, let's say, sessions which are completely out of my comfort zone, and then I'm surprised by the new information I get. Does it work for you as well?
Yes, I think generally I'm a very curious person. And I love that saying that you only know what you know, right? And if I only go to, say, networking sessions, I only know networking then. And especially with events like either reInvent or summits, which cover all of like the AWS services. You sort of want to broaden your horizons just to know what's out there. So I make it a point to try like something that I have absolutely no idea about, and like, okay, let's learn about it. Let's see what the hype is about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so sometimes okay, this is not really my cup of tea.
Which is fine. But then you know that it's
something.
not your cup of tea. But a lot of times you're like, wow, this is amazing. And I've faced that when doing sessions about infrastructure as code, when I've had a front-end engineer come to the room just like that, and they're like, wait, I know JavaScript coding. I know nothing about the cloud, but you're telling me I could build cloud infrastructure with JavaScript, right? And their minds are like, whoa, right? And those are the times you will find a lot of value in going to these sessions. So,
and with regards to building things, I quite often see things going by on social media about game days. Can you tell me a little bit more about the game days?
Yes, if there's one key takeaway from today's session, it is that game days are a super way to learn about AWS and the cloud. Right? So what a game day is, it's an interactive session. It's a game where you're given an AWS account and a scenario. Right? And the scenario is a lot of fun. It typically involves unicorns, but don't worry about that for now. And you have a startup and things are failing and you're supposed to fix it. Right? So there are different scenarios. It tests different aspects of the cloud. And you work in teams, and there's a point system and there's a leaderboard. So yeah, check out AWS Game Day. We hosted one for the community some time back, and events happen throughout the year. They're virtual, they're in person. Do check it out.
And it's also something you can organize in your own organization,
sorry, I
right?
wanted to mention that. Yes,
and because it's not AWS specific thing, it's something to play a little bit more with the infrastructure. So you can also pick one of your applications, put it in AWS, and the objective is to make it more resilient, for example, and we have only 8 hours to fix that.
Yeah. And there are different modules, right? There are modules that are 3 hours long, there are 8-hour modules. It's a lot of fun, and I think doing something like that, I think, brings people who typically don't do cloud stuff or are hesitant to take the first step. You can bring them in, because you're working in teams, you don't have to be an expert, but everyone's help, helps in making something resilient. Yeah, it's. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, so, I as well. Especially because it's not only you building things, you also learn from other teams, right? Because it's a kind of competition.
Yes, for sure.
And sometimes you see other teams doing things which are you didn't thought about it.
Yeah, and there is no fixed way to do something on a game day. So if something breaks, there are multiple ways you can fix it, and sometimes teams will think very outside the box and do something really cool, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't even think that was possible, So that's a good way to learn.
Yeah, a lot of information again today.
Yeah.
I want to basically round up this session. Do you have any closing thoughts for our viewers at home?
Yes, so I don't know if you saw last year's keynote at reInvent. Andy Jassy mentioned that only 4 to 6% of IT spend is on the cloud, right? So even though it might not seem the case, this is still very much a growing business. So in terms of scope in IT as a career, you can't go wrong with it. That being said, there's a lot to learn, and it can seem overwhelming, but based on your background and what you want to do, there are different journeys you can take. So yeah, just dive straight into one of those journeys. Yeah.
Thanks, Selwan, for being here. Yeah. We will see you later today with a session about Amplify,
yes.
I believe.
Yes, that is correct. And yeah, thanks for having me. Great chatting with you, Stain.
It was an honor to have this famous guy
Not really.
here on the table. I want to thank everyone.